I've kept quiet for 31 years, not because anyone ordered me to, not because I signed papers or took oaths beyond the ones we all took. I kept quiet because some things don't need to be said. Some things don't need recognition. But last Tuesday evening at the VFW hall in Fayetteville, North Carolina, changed everything. What happened that night forced me to break my silence. And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. My name is Walter Sullivan. I am 73 years old, and for the last 15 years, I have been coming into Post 8715 every Tuesday night around 6:30. I order the same meal every time, a burger, medium well, with extra pickles and a Coke. I sit in the same corner booth under the faded photograph of the 1991 deployment ceremony, and I listen. I listen to the tales, the gripes, the jokes, and the remembrances. I don't say much. A nod here, a word or two spoken low there. Most of the younger ones don't even know my name. If stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. We share them daily, and they deserve to be heard. That Tuesday started like any other. The North Carolina heat was brutal, even for September, and the air conditioning in the hall wasn't quite keeping up with the crowd. Maybe 40 veterans were there that night. The usual mix of ages, branches, wars. You could tell who served where just by looking at them, the way they carried themselves, the tattoos, the ball caps. Some wounds you can see. Most you can't. I walked in at 6:28, exactly like always. The kid working the door couldn't have been more than 25, nodded at me without really looking. Fair enough. I'm not much to look at. Gray hair, thinning on top, reading glasses that slide down my nose, button-up shirt from JCPenney, jeans that are probably 10 years old, white New Balance sneakers. I look like someone's grandfather, which I am. 3 grandkids, all under 10. They think Papa Walt used to fix helicopters in the Army. Close enough. I ordered my burger from Janet, the waitress who's worked here longer than anyone can remember. She knows my order by heart but still writes it down anyway. It's part of the ritual. Part of what makes this place feel like home. The booth in the corner was empty, like it usually is. Nobody wants to sit that far from the bar. But I like it. Good view of the whole room. Old habits. I slid in, my knee protesting the movement like it always does since the surgery 3 years ago. Different surgery, different war, different lifetime. The conversation in the hall was typical Tuesday night stuff. Someone's disability claim was stuck in the VA system. Someone else's kid just graduated basic. A heated debate about whether the new Marvel movie got military tactics right. I smiled at that one. If they only knew how little Hollywood understands about what really happens in the dark places of the world. The memories of Desert Storm don't fade. Not really. People think they do. They think time heals all wounds, the decades soften the edges of what you saw and did. But some memories are carved into you with such precision that 30 years later, you can still feel the sand in your teeth, smell the burned fuel, hear the whisper of wind across a rocky desert at 3 a.m. I was thinking about one particular night, February 8th, 1991, when a group of guys I didn't recognize came in. 5 of them, maybe early 30s, loud and confident. The kind of loud that comes from too many deployments to Afghanistan, too many nights of adrenaline and fear, and not quite enough time to process it all. They weren't disrespectful exactly, just taking up more space than they needed to. I understood it. I'd been there. February 8th was a Thursday. I remember because we'd been in country for 36 days, and Thursdays meant we had 2 days until our scheduled supply drop. If the weather held, if our coordinates were still secure, if a dozen other things went right. My team leader, Staff Sergeant James Doc Holloway, had started marking time by supply drops instead of days. Made the weeks feel shorter, he said. Made the mission feel more manageable. There were 4 of us. Doc, the team leader, 32 years old, 2 kids back home in Tennessee. Marcus Reyes, our communications specialist, could fix any radio with duct tape and prayer. Kevin O'Brien, the youngest at 24, our weapons guy, could shoot the wings off a fly at 400 meters. And me, Walter Sullivan, intelligence specialist, Arabic speaker, the guy who could blend into a Baghdad street market and nobody would look twice. They called me Sandstorm because on our second night in country, we got caught in a dust storm so bad we couldn't see 3 feet. While the others hunkered down and waited it out, I navigated us 12 kilometers using nothing but feel and instinct, got us to an overwatch position that gave us eyes on a Republican Guard armor depot. Doc said I moved through that storm like I was part of it. The name stuck. We'd trained together for 8 months before deployment, learned each other's breathing patterns, knew each other's tells, could communicate with hand signals in pitch darkness. Special operations is built on trust. You trust your team with your life every single day. You trust them to watch your back, to make the right call, to never quit no matter what. On February 8th, we were 40 kilometers west of Baghdad, watching a suspected chemical weapons facility. Our orders were surveillance only. Observe, document, report. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. We'd been in position for 3 days, living in a hide site that was essentially a hole in the ground covered with camouflage netting and dirt. The facility was massive. 30 buildings, heavy security, trucks moving in and out at all hours. We watched through high-powered optics, photographed everything with specialized cameras, documented patterns. Guard rotations, vehicle movements, air defense positions, everything. On the 3rd night, something changed. Trucks arrived. Different trucks, civilian vehicles, white sedans with government plates. Men in suits got out. Not military, not regular security. These were intelligence officers, maybe even political leadership. Doc wanted to photograph them, but the risk was enormous. If they spotted our position, if one guard looked the wrong direction at the wrong time, we were dead. No backup, no extraction, just 4 Americans 40 kilometers deep in hostile territory. "We need those pictures," Doc whispered. We were lying side by side in the hide, barely breathing, watching through our scopes. Those faces could be high-value targets. "Give me 10 minutes," I said. "I can get closer." Doc looked at me like I was insane. "Closer? Walt, we're 800 meters from the perimeter. Any closer, and you're inside their security zone." "Exactly. They're looking out, not in. I can approach from the east, use the wadi, get within 200 meters. Better photos, clearer faces. If you're caught, then I'm not caught," I said simply. That's the thing about special operations. Sometimes you have to do things that seem impossible. Sometimes you have to trust yourself more than logic, more than training, more than common sense. Sometimes you just have to move. I went, left my rifle, took only a pistol and the camera, moved through the darkness using terrain and shadow, found the wadi, a dry riverbed, and followed it toward the facility. The sand was cool, almost cold in the night air. Stars overhead were so bright they cast shadows. I could hear dogs barking in the distance, guards talking in Arabic, the hum of generators. 200 meters. I stopped behind a berm, raised the camera, started shooting. Click, click, click. Each photo felt like it was echoing across the desert. Each shot felt like it might be the one that gave me away. Got 15 photos, faces, license plates, unit insignia. Then one of the guards turned toward my position. Didn't see me exactly, but something caught his attention. Maybe movement, maybe shadow, maybe just instinct. I froze, absolutely still. Not breathing, not blinking, just another shape in the Iraqi night. The guard stared in my direction for what felt like hours, probably 30 seconds. Then he shook his head, lit a cigarette, turned away. I moved. Back the way I'd come, slow and smooth, every step calculated. Took me 40 minutes to cover 800 meters. When I slid back into the hide site, Doc looked at me like I'd returned from the dead. "You're fucking crazy," he whispered. "Got the shots," I whispered back. We transmitted those photos 6 hours later during our scheduled communication window. 3 days after that, an F-117 Nighthawk dropped 2 precision-guided bombs on that facility. Whatever they were making there, they weren't making it anymore. That was one night, one mission. We had 47 of them. 47 times where we went places we shouldn't go, saw things we shouldn't see, did things that officially never happened. And every single time, we came back. Every single time, we completed the mission. Around 7 o'clock at the VFW, those memories were fresh in my mind when the young guys came in. One of them caught my eye as they walked past my booth. Tall kid, broad shoulders, high and tight haircut that said he'd gotten out recently. Tattoos on both forearms, the kind every infantry guy gets. His eyes swept over me the way soldiers scan rooms, and I saw the exact moment he dismissed me as irrelevant. Just another old man taking up space. They grabbed the long table near the bar, ordered pitchers of beer, and settled into that particular brand of veteran camaraderie that sounds aggressive to civilians, but is actually just how we communicate. Lots of profanity, lots of insults, lots of laughter. I didn't mind. The noise was comforting in its way. Proof that there are still young men willing to do hard things. Janet brought my burger at 7:15. Extra pickles, like always. The plate was hot, and the smell of grilled meat and fried onions filled my corner of the hall. Simple pleasures. That's what my wife Margaret always says. I've learned to appreciate simple pleasures. Coffee in the morning, grandkids laughing, a burger on Tuesday night. After the things I've seen, simple pleasures feel like miracles. I was halfway through my meal when one of the young guys from the loud table got up, the tall one who'd looked past me earlier. He walked toward the bathroom, and his path took him right past my booth. He glanced down at my plate, then at me, and something in his expression changed. A smirk, maybe. Or pity. Hard to tell. "Burger and a Coke," he said. Not exactly to me, but not exactly to himself either. "Living large, old-timer." I nodded, didn't say anything. What was there to say? He wasn't wrong. It was just a burger and a Coke. In another life, on another night in another desert, I would have killed for a burger and a Coke. Would have traded a month's pay for one cold American Coke and a hot meal that didn't come from an MRE package or a stolen Iraqi ration. I remembered one night, had to be late January '91, when Reyes got so desperate for real food that he suggested we hit a Baghdad restaurant. Not for intelligence, not for mission-related purposes. Just because he wanted shawarma from an actual restaurant instead of the dried goat meat we'd been eating for 2 weeks. "You want to waltz into a Baghdad restaurant?" Doc had said. "In the middle of a war? While we're supposed to be ghosts?" "I speak Arabic," I'd said quietly. "I can blend." 2 of us, civilian clothes, during evening prayer when everyone's distracted, in and out in 20 minutes. Doc thought about it longer than he should have. That's how desperate we all were. That's what 6 weeks behind enemy lines does to you. Makes you consider impossibly stupid ideas just for a moment of normalcy. "No," he finally said, "but I respect the hell out of your courage for suggesting it." We'd laughed about that. Quiet laughter, the kind you do when you're scared and hungry and so far from home that home feels like a myth. The kind of laughter that keeps you sane when everything else wants to break you. The young guy, Bennett, was still standing there, waiting for me to respond. He started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. "You serve?" "I did," I said quietly. "Yeah? When?" There was something in his tone, not quite challenging, but testing, measuring, comparing. "Long time ago." "Vietnam?" He said it like he was guessing my age, trying to place me in history. "After that?" He nodded slowly, clearly losing interest. "Cool. Thanks for your service, man." The phrase hung in the air. I've heard it thousands of times, well-meaning, mostly meaningless, but I nodded, because what else do you do? He walked away, and I went back to my burger, but I could hear him at his table, laughing with his friends. Not at me, exactly, but about me. About old guys at the VFW who sit alone in corners and order burgers and Cokes and live in the past. About how they'd never end up like that. How they'd never be that guy. I understood. I really did. When you're 30 and you've done hard things, it's impossible to imagine being 73 and quiet and invisible. When you're 30 and you've kicked down doors in Fallujah or Kandahar, you can't picture a future where you're the guy people look past. The guy who orders the same meal every Tuesday. The guy who doesn't tell stories. But here's what they don't understand yet. Here's what I couldn't have understood when I was their age. Sometimes the quietest guys have the loudest stories. Sometimes the ones who don't talk about it did things that can't be talked about. Sometimes the burger and the Coke aren't about giving up or living in the past. Sometimes they're about finally being able to appreciate being alive at all. I finished my meal in silence. The young guys kept drinking, kept laughing. The rest of the hall did what it always does, hummed along with its own collective memory, its own shared understanding that we're all connected by something most civilians can't comprehend. Around 8 o'clock, the door opened again. This time, a different energy walked in. I felt it before I saw who it was. That particular frequency of command presence. The way the room's attention shifted, even though nobody consciously acknowledged it. A man in his 40s, military bearing, khaki pants, and a fitted polo shirt. The kind of civilian clothes that retired officers wear. Expensive, but understated. His posture was perfect, his haircut fresh, his eyes sharp and assessing. I knew what he was before anyone said a word. Field grade officer. Probably a colonel, maybe a light bird. The kind of officer who's seen combat, but also wears stars in his future if he wants them. He walked to the bar, ordered something, and leaned against it while he waited. His eyes swept the room, taking inventory. Combat scanning. It never goes away. That's when his gaze landed on me. Most people's eyes would have slid past, but his didn't. Something about me registered, not recognition exactly, but interest, calculation. The way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the pattern. The young guy from before, the tall one, noticed the officer too. I watched him stand up straighter, try to project more discipline even 3 beers deep. That's how it works. Doesn't matter if you've been out for 5 years. An officer walks into the room and you still respond. The officer got his drink, looked like whiskey, neat, and walked toward the back of the hall, toward my corner, my booth, my safe space where I've sat for 15 years without anyone bothering me. He stopped at my table, looked down at me with those sharp, calculating eyes. "Mind if I join you?" His voice was measured, polite, but there was steel underneath. The kind of voice that gives orders and expects them to be followed. "It's a free country," I said quietly. "That's what we fought for anyway." He smiled at that. Not a full smile, but the corner of his mouth turned up. He slid into the booth across from me, set his whiskey down carefully. "Colonel Marcus Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Retired, 2 years now." I shook his hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact, all the things they teach you. "Walter Sullivan." "What did you do, Walter?" "Direct, no small talk." I appreciated that. Logistics, I said. It was my standard answer. Not technically a lie. Everything is logistics when you break it down far enough. Supplies, transportation, support, all logistics. The fact that what I transported and supplied was classified at levels most people don't even know exist, well, that was nobody's business. Thompson nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't leave mine. What unit? Third course, I said. Again, not a lie. Also, not the whole truth. The Third Corps is huge. Thousands of soldiers. Saying you were in Third Corps is like saying you were in the Army. Technically accurate, functionally meaningless. But something in the way I said it must have registered with him, because his expression changed, sharpened. Third Corps, Gulf War? Spent some time in the sandbox, I said quietly. 90 through 91. He took a sip of his whiskey. That was a hell of a war. Short, but intense. Lots of moving pieces. It was. You see much action? The question hung between us. How do you answer that? How do you explain to someone that you saw more action in 6 months than most soldiers see in entire careers? How do you explain missions that officially never happened, targets that were never hit, operations that left no paper trail? Some, I said. Thompson leaned back, studying me. You know what's interesting, Walter? I've spent 26 years in the Army. I've met a lot of veterans, and I've learned that the guys who did the most dangerous work are usually the ones who say the least about it. I didn't respond. What could I say to that? But that's when the young guy from before, the tall one, appeared at our table. He was holding a fresh beer, swaying slightly. Not drunk, but not sober either. Colonel, he said, nodding at Thompson with exaggerated respect. Then he looked at me. Old-timer. Less respect, more dismissal. Thompson's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. Everything okay here? Thompson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Oh yeah, all good, the young guy said. His name tag said Bennett, Tyler Bennett. Just saying hi to the old man, making sure he's not too lonely over here in his corner. We were just talking about him, actually, me and my buddies. Is that right? Thompson's voice was cooler now. Yeah, you know, Tuesday tradition and all. The old guys who come here and sit alone and don't really talk to anyone. Don't really contribute. Just kind of exist, you know? Bennett wasn't trying to be cruel. I don't think he had the self-awareness to understand what he was doing. He was just young and confident and a little drunk and hadn't yet learned that the universe has a way of humbling you when you most need it. Thompson set his glass down slowly. You served, Bennett? Yes, sir. Army infantry. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 2009 to 2011, then 2012 to 2013. 3 years total in country. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge. He said it like it was a resume, like credentials that would impress. And don't get me wrong, they were impressive. 2 deployments to Afghanistan is no joke. Bennett had earned the right to be proud, but Thompson wasn't impressed. Not the way Bennett expected. That's good service, Thompson said quietly. Your country thanks you. But let me ask you something. What do you know about the man sitting across from me? Bennett shrugged. Just another old guy. Vietnam era, maybe. Sits in the corner every week. Keeps to himself. Probably never saw real combat. Just wants to feel included, you know? The words landed like physical blows. I saw them hit Thompson, saw his expression darken. But I also saw him control it, channel it, turn it into something cold and sharp. His name is Walter Sullivan, Thompson said, his voice dropping to that particular register that officers use when they're about to destroy someone. Do you know what that name means, Bennett? Bennett blinked, confused. Should I? Probably not. You're too young, and he's too humble. But I know that name, because 15 years ago, when I was a young captain going through selection for special operations, an instructor told us a story about a soldier who operated so far ahead of friendly forces during Desert Storm that his missions weren't even classified. They were completely off the books. About a man with a call sign that became legend in the special operations community. My heart started beating faster. Thompson's eyes were locked on Bennett, but I could feel his attention expanding, including the whole table, the whole room. This instructor told us about operations that technically never happened, about a team that went into Baghdad 6 weeks before the ground campaign started, about insertions so deep behind enemy lines that if they'd been caught, the United States would have denied their existence, about a soldier who spoke fluent Arabic, who could blend into civilian populations, who gathered intelligence that shaped the entire war strategy. Bennett's expression was changing, confusion giving way to something else, uncertainty. This instructor told us that if we wanted to understand what real covert operations looked like, we should study this man's work. Except we couldn't, because his file is so classified that even generals don't have access to it. All we had was a call sign and stories. Stories that seemed impossible. Until you met someone who'd worked with him and realized every single one was true. Thompson turned to look at me directly now. "Would you mind telling young Bennett here your call sign, Walter?" The room had gone quiet. Not just our corner, but the whole VFW hall. Somehow the entire space had tuned into this conversation without anyone obviously listening. I met Thompson's eyes, saw respect there, recognition, understanding. I'd spent 31 years avoiding this moment, 31 years being invisible, 31 years eating burgers in corners and letting people dismiss me as just another old man. But maybe Thompson was right. Maybe Bennett needed to hear this. Maybe they all did. "Sandstorm," I said quietly. The word hung in the air for 3 heartbeats. Then Thompson stood up, came to attention, and saluted me. A colonel, saluting an enlisted man in civilian clothes in a VFW hall on a Tuesday night. "Colonel, sir, you don't have to," I started to say. "Yes, I do," Thompson said firmly. "You're one of the reasons we won that war so fast. You're one of the reasons thousands of soldiers came home alive. And you're one of the reasons the special operations community even exists in its modern form." Bennett had gone pale. Sandstorm? The Sandstorm? But I thought that was exaggerated, a myth, something instructors tell you to motivate you. "It's not a myth," Thompson said, still at attention. "It's just classified. For 30 years, Walter Sullivan and his team conducted operations that the government couldn't acknowledge. Deep reconnaissance, target identification, some direct action when necessary. They operated with no backup, no extraction plan, and minimal oversight. They were there before Special Forces was officially there. They made the impossible possible." I wanted to tell Thompson to sit down, to stop making this into something it wasn't. But he was right about one thing. It had happened, all of it. Every impossible mission, every night operation, every moment of terror and precision and prayer that we'd make it out alive. "Iraq, 1990 to 91, I said quietly, giving them what I'd never given anyone. Inserted 3 weeks before anyone else. January 3rd, 1991. 4-man team. Objective: locate and identify high-value targets, map Republican Guard positions, assess chemical weapons facilities. Secondary objective: create conditions for the air campaign to be maximally effective." The hall was completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped moving. We spent 6 weeks behind enemy lines, I continued, living in the desert, moving at night, hiding during the day, eating Iraqi rations we stole from supply depots, drinking from wadis and canals, speaking Arabic when we had to, playing civilians when we could, hiding when we couldn't do either. I paused. Let the weight of those words settle. 6 weeks. Most special operations missions are measured in hours or days. We'd lived in enemy territory for 43 days. 43 days of constant vigilance, 43 nights of minimal sleep, 43 mornings of waking up and wondering if today would be the day we got caught. Our insertion was Halo, I said, using the term they'd understand. High altitude, low opening, jumped at 28,000 feet, opened at 3,000, landed 12 kilometers from our first objective. The pilot who dropped us said he'd never done an insertion that far into hostile territory. Said if we got caught, he couldn't come back for us. We knew that. Accepted it. Thompson was leaning forward now, completely focused. Bennett had sat down at a nearby table, his earlier arrogance replaced with something resembling awe. The first 72 hours were the worst, I continued, surprised at how easily the memories were flowing now. 31 years of silence, and suddenly I couldn't stop talking. We moved at night, hid during day, found a wadi, a dry riverbed that gave us concealment during daylight. Made our first hide site in the bank of that wadi, covered it with rocks and dirt and our camo netting. Stayed there for 4 days, just watching, learning patrol patterns, mapping routes, understanding how Iraqi forces moved in that sector. Did you have extraction planned? Thompson asked. 3 contingency extraction points, I said. Each one would only be viable for a 48-hour window at specific dates. Miss your window, you wait 2 weeks for the next one, assuming you're still alive, assuming you haven't been captured, assuming you can still move. Jesus, someone whispered from another table. The hard part wasn't the danger, I said. I mean, the danger was there, every hour of every day. But the hard part was the isolation. No contact with friendly forces except for scheduled comm windows every 72 hours. And those were receive only. We transmitted intelligence, confirmed we were alive, and went back to radio silence. No one was coming if things went bad. No one was checking on us. We were alone. I took a sip of water, my throat suddenly dry. These memories, buried for so long, were vivid now. Almost overwhelming. Our team, Doc, Reyes, O'Brien, and me, we became something more than brothers out there. You know how people talk about battlefield bonds? About trust? That's all true, but it goes deeper when you're operating that far forward. You don't just trust your teammates with your life, you trust them with your sanity, with your humanity, with the parts of yourself that want to give up. Tell us about one mission, Bennett said softly. Just one. Help us understand. I looked at him, saw genuine interest now, genuine respect. Saw a young man who'd done hard things himself and wanted to understand the continuum of service he was part of. February 19th, I said. Day 47. We'd identified a command and control node on the outskirts of Basra. Intelligence suggested senior Republican Guard leadership was using it as a coordination center. Our job was to confirm, photograph key personnel, and mark the building for an airstrike. I closed my eyes, pulled myself back to that night. The smell of diesel and burning garbage, the sound of distant artillery, the feel of Iraqi sand, finer than beach sand, getting into everything. The building was in a residential neighborhood. Lots of civilians, lots of collateral damage potential. We couldn't just walk up and take photos. Needed to get inside, or at least close enough to confirm what was happening inside. How? Thompson asked. I went in, I said simply. Alone. Civilian clothes, local merchant cover story. Knocked on doors, pretended to be selling black market cigarettes. Got invited into 3 houses, positioned myself to see into the target building from different angles. Confirmed military activity. Got photos of 2 colonels and a brigadier general. You went into an Iraqi neighborhood, Bennett said slowly, in the middle of a war and sold cigarettes? Alleged to sell cigarettes, I corrected. Didn't actually have any, just empty cartons, but nobody checked. They were more interested in why I was there, what I'd seen, what the Americans were doing. Played the scared civilian, told them I'd heard artillery to the west, was worried about my family, built rapport, got what we needed. And got out? Eventually. One guy got suspicious, started asking detailed questions about which neighborhood I was from, what mosque I attended, questions I couldn't answer well. Had to excuse myself, said my wife was waiting, needed to get home before curfew. Walked 6 blocks maintaining cover, then broke into a run once I was out of sight. Doc and the others were in overwatch, covering me, but they couldn't intervene without compromising the mission. Did the guy follow you? For 3 blocks. Then he stopped. Either got tired or decided I wasn't worth the effort. I made it back to the rally point and we moved to a new hide site. 2 days later, that command center got hit by an F-16. Watching that building explode through our optics, knowing the intelligence I'd gathered, had made that strike possible. That's a feeling you never forget. Thompson nodded slowly. 47 missions like that? Not all the same. Some were pure surveillance. Some were target confirmation. 3 times we had to conduct direct action, taking out communication nodes or supply caches when intelligence suggested imminent threat to coalition forces. Those 3 missions are still classified at a level I can't discuss, even now. How many missions involved you going in alone like that? 16, I said. I was the only one who spoke Arabic fluently enough to pass as local. O'Brien looked too American, Reyes too Hispanic, Doc too old. I'm average height, dark hair, can tan dark enough to blend. Learned the accent, the mannerisms, the way Iraqi men move and speak. Became someone else for those hours. That's terrifying, Bennett said. It's worse than terrifying, I said honestly. Terrifying is when you know you might die. What I felt was different. I was so deep in cover, so committed to the role, that part of me worried I might forget who I really was. Worried that if I stayed in that headspace too long, Walter Sullivan might disappear and I'd just become whoever I was pretending to be. The room was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. That's why the team was so important, I continued. Every time I came back from one of those solo missions, Doc would look me in the eyes and say my name. Walter Sullivan, Sergeant, United States Army. He'd make me repeat it, make me remember who I was. Sounds simple, but out there, with the stress and the fear and the isolation, you needed those anchors to reality. How many missions? Thompson asked quietly. 47 separate intelligence reports, 19 high-value targets identified, 7 chemical weapon sites mapped, 3 direct action operations when intelligence indicated imminent threat to coalition forces. Casualties? 0. We all came home. Jesus Christ, Bennett whispered. Not quite, I said. Just lucky and well-trained and terrified enough to be careful. Thompson finally sat back down, though his posture remained rigid with respect. The instructor who told us about you was Captain Marcus Wilson. He said you saved his life in Basra. I remembered Wilson. Young lieutenant back then, got separated from his unit during the initial push. We'd found him by accident while we were extracting. Kid was about to be captured or killed. I remember him, I said. Good soldier? Is he still in? Retired general now. He'd probably love to hear from you. Maybe, I said, though I knew I wouldn't reach out. That's not who I am. Listen, Colonel, I appreciate you standing up for me. But Bennett here isn't wrong. I am just an old man now. I do sit in corners. I don't contribute much to these conversations. And that's okay. I did my time, did my job. Now, I just want to eat my burger in peace. With respect, sir, Thompson said, and calling me sir was its own form of honor. You've earned the right to sit wherever the hell you want and do whatever the hell you want. But these young guys need to understand that the quiet ones, The humble ones, the ones who don't brag, they're often the ones who did things we can't even imagine. Bennett was standing there looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I had no idea. How could you? I said gently. I don't exactly advertise. And you were right about one thing. I do like my routine. There's peace in routine. After 6 weeks of never knowing if each breath will be your last, after coming home and trying to be normal again, after watching the news cover a war you were part of but can't talk about, routine is medicine. But what happened next changed everything. Thompson pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. You mind if I step away for a minute? I shrugged. It was a free country. He walked toward the front of the hall, phone to his ear. I could see him talking, gesturing. Whatever he was saying, it was intense. Bennett pulled up a chair, sat down without asking. Mr. Sullivan, I really am sorry. I've been coming here for 3 months and I've seen you every Tuesday. I just assumed. I thought you were one of those guys who hung around the VFW because they didn't have anywhere else to be. I don't have anywhere else to be, I said. I choose to be here. There's a difference. Can I ask you something? What was it like, operating that far behind enemy lines? No support, no backup? How do you answer that question? How do you compress 6 weeks of absolute terror, moments of beauty, impossible decisions, and quiet pride into something comprehensible? It was the most alive I've ever felt, and the most scared I've ever been. Both at the same time, I said finally. Every moment mattered. Every decision counted. Your team is everything. The mission is everything. And somewhere in the middle of all that intensity, you find out who you really are. Did you ever want to talk about it after? No, I said honestly. The mission was classified. My team signed NDAs. But more than that, I didn't need to talk about it. I'd done something that mattered. I'd served something bigger than myself. That was enough. But don't you want credit? Recognition? They gave you medals, right? They gave me medals I can't show anyone. Awards that are locked in a classified file. Commendations that my wife knows exist but doesn't know details about. I paused. And that's fine. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because my country needed someone to do hard things in hard places. I happened to have the right skills at the right time. Thompson came back to the table. His expression was different now, excited but controlled. Walter, I just got off the phone with General Wilson. He wants to see you. That's nice, I said carefully, but I'm not sure what. No, you don't understand. He wants to see you at an event. There's a special operations reunion next month at Fort Bragg. Desert Storm veterans. He wants you there. He says it's time people knew your story. Colonel, I appreciate that, but... Sir, Thompson said, and the sir carried weight now, carried meaning. You've spent 31 years being quiet, being humble, letting your work speak for itself. That's noble. But there's a generation of soldiers who need to know that guys like you exist, who need to understand that the real heroes aren't always the ones with the loudest stories. Sometimes they're the quiet old men sitting in corners eating burgers. I looked around the VFW hall, 40 veterans, all ages, all branches, all watching our table. Bennett standing there looking like his worldview had just been rearranged. Thompson sitting across from me with respect burning in his eyes. Sometimes the world needs certain stories. Sometimes the quiet ones need to speak, not for recognition or credit or ego, but because the next generation needs to understand that service comes in many forms, that courage isn't always obvious, that the most important work is often the work nobody sees. Okay, I said quietly. One event, one speech. Then I go back to my burgers. Thompson smiled. Deal. The rest of that Tuesday evening became something different than it had ever been. People came to my table. Not to gawk or demand stories, but to shake my hand, to say simple things. Thank you. We didn't know. It's an honor. Bennett sat with me until I left, asked smart questions, listened more than he talked, started to understand that his 2 deployments to Afghanistan, as difficult and dangerous as they were, existed in a continuum of service that stretched back decades, that his courage was real, but so was mine, that we were all connected by something deeper than branch or era or mission. Around 10 o'clock I stood up to leave. My knee protested like always. Thompson walked me to the door. "You really going to do this?" he asked. "The reunion?" I said I would. Good. Because General Wilson said something else on the phone. He said he's kept your file request paperwork for 30 years. He can get your missions declassified. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that people can understand what you did. I stopped walking. "I don't need that, Colonel." "I know you don't," Thompson said. "But maybe we do. Maybe the country does. Maybe there are young soldiers right now, sitting in some fob in some shit corner of the world, wondering if what they're doing matters. And maybe hearing about a guy named Sandstorm who spent 6 weeks in hell and came home and lived a quiet life and never asked for credit. Maybe that matters." I thought about that. About the kid I'd been in 1990. About the man I'd become. About the 31 years of silence and whether they'd been the right choice. "Maybe," I said finally. I drove home that night to the house I've lived in for 34 years. Margaret was waiting up, reading a book in bed. She looked up when I came in, saw something different in my face. "Good burger?" she asked, like she does every Tuesday. "Different burger," I said. And then I told her, not everything. I'd never tell her everything, but enough. Enough that she understood why a colonel had called me sir in a VFW hall. Enough that she understood why her quiet husband, who works part-time at Home Depot and drives a Toyota Camry and never talks about his service, had spent 6 weeks of his life doing things that officially never happened. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed we'd bought in 1993, and I talked. For 2 hours I talked, told her about the desert, about the fear, about the impossibly beautiful nights when the stars were so bright they hurt to look at, about the team, about Doc's steady presence, Reyes's dark humor, O'Brien's unshakable optimism. The extraction was the hardest part, I said. February 20th. We'd been in country for 48 days, completed all primary objectives. Intelligence said the ground campaign was starting soon, and we needed to be out before coalition forces pushed into Iraq. Our extraction point was 90 kilometers away. We had 48 hours to get there. Margaret put her book down, giving me her complete attention. She'd heard pieces of stories over the years, fragments that escaped during nightmares, or moments when the walls came down. But never like this. Never this complete. "We moved during daylight," I continued. "First time we'd done that. Too risky to move at night because of all the military traffic. Figured we could blend better during the day, look like refugees or displaced civilians. Doc and I went first, dressed in Iraqi clothing we'd stolen weeks earlier. O'Brien and Reyes followed 2 kilometers behind, providing overwatch with long rifles. I could see it all again. The dust, the heat that made the air shimmer, the sound of distant explosions as coalition air forces pounded Iraqi positions, the fear that ate at your stomach because you knew you were so close to getting out. And that's when soldiers make mistakes. When you're almost safe, almost home, almost done, that's when you let your guard down. About 30 kilometers from the extraction point, we ran into an Iraqi patrol. 8 soldiers, 2 vehicles. They were setting up a checkpoint on the road we needed to cross. We could have bypassed them, added another 12 kilometers to our route. But that would have put us outside the extraction window. Missed that helicopter, and we'd have to survive another 2 weeks. "What did you do?" Margaret asked, though part of her probably didn't want to know. "Doc made a decision. Said we'd approach as civilians, play confused locals trying to get away from the fighting. Risky as hell, but less risky than missing extraction. So we walked toward that checkpoint, hands visible, looking scared and uncertain, which wasn't hard because that's exactly what we were. I paused, remembering the weight of my hidden pistol, the feel of sweat running down my spine, the absolute certainty that in about 30 seconds we were all going to die. The Iraqi soldiers stopped us, started asking questions. Where are you from? Where are you going? Why are you traveling during the war? I answered in Arabic, played the frightened peasant, said we were trying to reach family in the south. One of the soldiers, a sergeant, didn't believe me, kept asking more questions, looking at Doc, noticing that despite the Iraqi clothes, something about us wasn't right. "Walter," Margaret said softly, and I heard the fear in her voice. Fear for a moment that had happened 31 years ago, but somehow felt immediate again. "Doc did something brilliant," I said. He started coughing. Deep, wet, horrible coughing. Made it sound like he was dying. I told the sergeant my brother was sick, needed medicine. We'd heard there was a doctor in the next town. The sergeant looked at Doc like he might be contagious. That's when O'Brien took his shot. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. "Not at the soldiers," I said quickly. "At the radio in one of the vehicles, 600-meter shot with a suppressed rifle. Hit the radio dead center, destroyed it before they could call in our position. The soldiers scattered, thought they were under attack from American aircraft. In the confusion, we ran, sprinted into the desert, moving faster than we'd moved in weeks. The Iraqis fired some shots, but they were panicking, shooting at shadows. We made it to a wadi, went to ground, and waited for nightfall." "Did they follow you?" "They tried. Spent about 2 hours searching the area. But we were ghosts by then. Knew how to disappear, how to use terrain, how to become invisible. They eventually gave up, drove away. We stayed in that wadi until sunset, then covered the last 30 kilometers in 4 hours. Made the extraction point with 20 minutes to spare." I could still remember the sound of that helicopter. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The MH-60 came in low and fast, touched down for 45 seconds. We ran from our hide position, climbed aboard, and then we were lifting off, leaving Iraq behind, leaving 48 days of fear and exhaustion and impossible missions in the sand below us. "When we landed back at base in Saudi Arabia," I said, my voice quieter now, "Doc threw up. Just walked off the helicopter and threw up everything in his stomach. The stress, the fear he'd been holding in for 6 weeks, it all came out. O'Brien sat down on the tarmac and cried. Reyes couldn't stop shaking. And I just stood there, watching the sun come up over the Saudi desert, trying to understand that we'd made it, that we were alive, that somehow, impossibly, we'd completed every single mission and all 4 of us were coming home." Margaret was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. "We spent 3 days being debriefed," I continued. "Intelligence officers asking questions, making us review every report, every photograph, every piece of information we'd gathered. Then they told us it was classified. All of it. The missions, the intelligence, even our presence in Iraq before the ground war. They said we'd done something historic, something that had saved American lives and shortened the war. But we could never talk about it. That must have been so hard," Margaret said. "It was," I admitted. Coming home to a country celebrating victory, watching the parades and the news coverage, knowing I'd been part of it but couldn't say anything. Watching other soldiers get medals and recognition while my awards went into a classified file. But we were alive, Maggie. All 4 of us came home. Not every special operations team can say that. What happened to the others? Your team? Doc retired in '98, lives in Tennessee now, raises horses. We still talk sometimes. Reyes got out in '95, became an engineer. He died 6 years ago. Heart attack. I went to his funeral, and his kids didn't even know what their dad had done in the war. O'Brien stayed in, made it to sergeant major before retiring in 2010. He's in Virginia, works for a defense contractor. We email maybe twice a year. And you? I did 2 more years after Desert Storm, then got out in '93. Met you at that wedding 6 months later. Best decision I ever made. She smiled through her tears. I knew you were special. The way you moved, the way you observed everything, the way you could be in a crowded room and somehow be invisible. I knew you'd done something important, I just never knew what. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before. You're telling me now, she said. That's what matters. We sat there in silence for a while. The bedroom was dark, except for her reading lamp, casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, I could hear crickets, the occasional car passing on our street. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Sounds that, for 6 weeks in 1991, seemed like impossible dreams. What happens now? Margaret finally asked. This reunion, this declassification. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to go back to being invisible, to keep eating my burgers on Tuesdays and living our quiet life. But Thompson was right about something. There are young soldiers out there who need to know that the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones who don't need recognition, they matter too. Maybe more than the ones who do. You were always going to tell this story eventually, Margaret said. You just needed someone to ask the right way. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking about those 6 weeks in Iraq. The heat, the fear, the strange beauty of the desert at night, stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. The weight of responsibility, knowing that if we failed, soldiers would die. Knowing that our reports would determine where bombs would fall, where troops would push, how the war would be fought. We didn't fail. We never failed. 47 missions, 0 casualties. Intelligence that helped end the war faster, cleaner, with fewer American deaths than anyone had predicted. And then we came home. And we went back to being regular people, back to our regular lives, back to a world that didn't know what we'd done and couldn't know and probably wouldn't believe it if they did know. For 31 years, that was enough. It was enough to know that I'd done my job, that my team had done our job, that we'd served something bigger than ourselves. But maybe Thompson and Wilson are right. Maybe it's time for a new kind of service. Not the kind where you infiltrate enemy territory or gather classified intelligence or live on the edge of death for weeks at a time. But the kind where you stand up and say, this happened, I was there. And there are others like me, quiet ones, humble ones, the ones you walk past without noticing. Next month, I'll go to Fort Bragg. I'll stand in front of other veterans and tell them parts of my story. Not all of it. Some things will always be classified, some things will always be mine alone to carry. But enough. Enough that they understand. And then I'll come home. I'll go back to my corner booth at the VFW. I'll order my burger with extra pickles and my Coke. I'll listen to the young guys tell their stories and the old guys remember their wars. I'll be quiet again. Invisible. Again. But maybe now, when they see that old man in the corner, they'll wonder. They'll think twice before dismissing someone based on age or appearance or how much they talk. They'll understand that every veteran has a story. Some are loud, some are quiet. And sometimes, the quietest ones are the most important. I don't need recognition. I never did. But if my story can help someone understand what service really means, that it's not about glory or recognition or telling the loudest stories, but about doing hard things when they need to be done and then going home and living your life, then maybe it's worth breaking 31 years of silence. My name is Walter Sullivan. I'm 73 years old. For 6 weeks in early 1991, I was known as Sandstorm. And I'm finally ready to tell you what that means. Have you ever witnessed someone's quiet courage that went completely unrecognized? If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We share stories like this every single day.